What is up, dudes and lady dudes? Welcome back to Just Nuts, guys. Today I've got another video for you. This time we're looking at a tier list for all of the new archetypes coming to Yu-Gi-Oh! In the next couple months. It's very rare that we end up with this many brand new archetypes. We have literally 10 whole new archetypes coming in the next 3 to 4 months. One's up in the air. There's only one archetype that we don't know when it's coming. All the rest we know are essentially coming in the next 3-ish months. Which is awesome. We don't get that very rare, so we're going to have a large influx of just like new deck, and we know about all of them right now. And there may be one or two more hiding. There's like a TCG exclusive for Blazing Vortex we'll find out about. Eventually we'll start getting reveals for the set after Blazing Vortex, and we'll probably have one, two, three more archetypes there. But I think that'll be a little bit after. I think we're probably like 2 months away from that kind of stuff, so not too concerned on that just yet. So without further ado, let's get into this tier list. Keeping in mind with these tiers, you've got obviously tier 0, which means I think the deck's going to be so good out the gate that it's just like already going to be the best deck in the game, and no deck's going to compete with it. None of those are going to be that. Tier 1 is obviously like alongside somewhere in the mix with like Infernoble and Dragon Link and Dinosaur at the moment, or even Dogmatica Invoke, those kinds of decks. Even should those might change in the upcoming months with ban list stuff, and you know what I mean. We'll see what happens there. Tier 2 would fall into like the Salamangreat and like Mech Knight Invoked category. I still think those are like still viable, like respectable decks. And then you have like tier 3, probably a lot of decks like Burning Abyss probably falls into tier 3. Trying to think of another good example of what's like tier 3, like Frogs maybe are tier 3. I mean, maybe that's even generous for Paleo Frogs, but like those kinds of decks like Trap Tricks may be considered tier 3. I think they're good enough to be tier 1, especially with Dogmatica stuff, but obviously it's playability or like ranked on how much they're played is also a factor there. But and then obviously you have tier 14, which means they're just going to be so bad they don't even count. They don't even make it to tier 3, so I'm just going to throw them in tier 14, which is kind of a joke, but kind of not. All right, so starting off, we're going to start off with the most interesting one, and the only one that is like not I guess slated for any specific set just yet. This one, it was revealed for a set in the OCG, but we don't know when it'll come here. We got all 14, I think, 13 or 14 cards revealed, and unfortunately, I think this deck is kind of cheeks. Now, here's the one thing is there is a little bit of saving grace in here that this deck does kind of seem to work, which is like generically plants overall. So maybe this deck will be featured in some kind of plant strategy going forward, because it does have like links that take just generically a level 4 lower plant. But I think for our intents and purposes here, I'm going to have to put him in tier 14, because I think as a pure deck, Sanavalon is not doing like anything by itself. It's going to need more support, more good cards, or it's going to need to be combined with some busted plant stuff already. I don't think it's even good enough to be tier 3 just yet. So I'm going to put the pure deck in tier 14. But maybe there could be a plant variant, like a plant deck that uses more generic good plant stuff than like the actual Sanavalon cards, and they're just kind of like a couple of them featured in there. That could maybe be tier 3, but I think the deck itself is going to fall into something below that, and that's why I'm going to throw it in tier 14. Next up, we have the new alien-based archetype, my Mutants. This is a cool deck. We got this all revealed like in the last week, a couple days ago. It's a cool archetype. It really is. But I just think it has like main deck monsters that are nothing but cloggy. It has a field spell that's meh, but not great. I mean, like, Konami makes all these search field spells, but not for this archetype. It would have helped. And you have to banish a lot of your own cards just to do certain effects. So you're like 2-for-1ing with a lot of different effects in the archetype, when you'd love to be going like 1-for-1 or even just plussing straight up. So overall, I'm going to have to drop this deck again in tier 14. I think it's not even good enough to be considered tier 3. Maybe after like maybe next set, if we got like again like 2 or 3, 4 more cards for the archetype, it definitely might help. And maybe I'm not giving the 2 continuous traps that were revealed the other day enough credit as far as how much they help round out the archetype after the initial reveals. But I think it's not even on the level of tier 3 just yet. So I'm going to put it under here with Sanavalon, unfortunately. I hate to do that, but like I think that's unfortunately where I have to go. Which takes us next to Datascape. So Datascape is a really interesting one here. This one is really tough, 100% better than tier 3. I would put it out the gate. Now the question becomes, do I think it'll be good enough to jump into tier 1, or do I think it sits more in tier 2? And I think, unfortunately, not really unfortunately, I mean, tier 2 is still pretty good. I mean, if a deck comes out the gate and it's already as good as Salamangreat, like, okay, put some respect on their name, man. I'm going to put them in tier 2, though. If there was a tier 1.5, I might even put them there. I do think they have a ton of potential. The deck is literally just like extenders on extenders on extenders. We know how decks like that could be really good, especially with not a ton of restrictions. Essentially, the only restriction this deck has is like you can't link summon with it very much. So that's really the only main restriction for the deck. So I still think it can work with that. It has an insane boss monster. It can make calamities. It can make rank 6s, synchro 6s, rank 3s. All those things, and I think that gives it access to a nice little pool of like monsters for utility, because a lot of those are what its own monsters end up being. So definitely keep an eye on this deck. All it takes is 1 or 2 more cards, and this deck could immediately be tier 1 and then some, as well as the fact that, like, keep in mind, relatively to where the metagame is right now, if we see Dragon Link, Infernobles, Dinosaurs all get hit on a ban list in December, like, all of these decks that I'm putting in tier 2 could immediately just be tier 1. They could just be there, right? So just keep an eye out for that, and we'll keep going. Next up, I have Su-10. Su-10's another interesting one because I actually really like their like surrounding cards, but I just don't think their payoff is just good enough yet. I want to throw them in tier 3 because I like them, but I think they actually more so end up in tier 14. Actually, you know what? I'm going to put them in tier 3. This may be a little bit generous, and maybe they're somewhere like tier 3.5, but I think they're one of those decks that because they have a field spell that searches, they have 2 monsters that search different things in the archetype, they have 1 card that essentially is like a power card, almost like Red Eyes Fusion, has restrictions on like what you can do for the rest of the turn, but it itself is pretty cool. I think it kind of opens up this deck to almost being like one of those archetypes like Invoked that can be splashed in a deck like Eldritch, and you can combine them like that. I think that has value in and of itself. This deck kind of reminds me of like Evil Eye, but this deck obviously still needs like a couple more cards. We got a new fusion revealed, which is an okay one. It's better than, I think, the first bigger boss monster. I just think like if you were going to have a card as powerful as the fusion card they have, you need a little more payoff from the monsters you're summoning. And I get it, just to have 1 card do something as to like summon monsters that are that strong, but like these are pretty underwhelming, I think, so far. But they do have a really nice pool of cards. They've got a ton of searchability. They have warriors in the archetype, so Rhoda's a thing, right? Like, so consistency is not a problem. They have nice utility cards as well between the traps and the quick play spell they have. I just think power-wise, they definitely need some kind of boss monster that's like, whoa, now that's something worth going into. At least makes you think something like that. So I'm going to put them in tier 3 for now. Maybe that's generous, but whatever. Su-10 in tier 3. Next up, we have Tri-Brigade. Now, Tri-Brigade's another interesting one because they're one of those archetypes that's like splashable. This deck does not work as its own archetype yet, and I will stand by that. It needs to splash with something else, and I'm going to put it in tier 2 for now. But I think this archetype's best way to combine with something is with Zodiac. Okay? Zodiac is like, with 1 card, can so easily put so many Beast Warriors in the grave to set up for these bigger plays from this archetype. And we also see in the OCG, like, Zodiac's like tier 1, like easily tier 1, but they've had a little bit stricter of a ban list for stuff like Infernobles and Dragon Link, so as well as having Maxi and stuff, so they don't see those combo decks running as rampant as we do. So I think I'm going to put them in tier 2 because I think if you're going to see this be played, it's going to be in Zodiac, at least on the competitive level. And I think Zodiac with like Negalogia, AA Zeus coming out also gets a huge buff, and so I think that like inadvertently buffs this archetype. I'm going to put them in tier 2. I don't think they're quite good enough because they really like all they do is like get to the Link 4. And Link 4 is a nice disruption for sure. Like I'm not saying that. I'm just saying like that's all it does. So even if you had extra extenders in your hand, you're like, I can't just end on like 2-3 disruptions. You just end on 1 good non-targeting banish. And that's kind of it. So that's why it needs to combine with Zodiac, and I think it's still a good pairing, and I think it's still going to be a good deck, but I don't think they're good enough for tier 1 just yet. So I'm going to put them in tier 2. Next up here, I have Evil Twins. This is like the fan favorite archetype of just like 2 girls that are, I guess, internet stars that also pair as like jewel thieves, whatever. This is a really interesting one because I think a lot of people have been undermining this deck's capabilities just yet. I would definitely probably put them in tier 2.5, but I don't think I can allow myself to put them in tier 2. So I'm going to put them in tier 3, but I'm going to put this with upside because I think, again, this archetype has that same thing with Su-10 where you don't need a ton of main deck commitments to this archetype. Also reminding me of something like Trickstar. You've got a search card. You've got a card that specials the monsters from the deck. Both the monsters are +1s as is. You have one of the link monsters that just draws you a card on summon. You also have a link monster that can pop a card on summon. And you can do both of these on your opponent's turns as well to allow you to get disruption or disadvantage on your opponent's turn, which is very, very good. So I think, again, this falls into a category with Su-10 of like, you could throw this with Eldritch. I mean, in fact, this could be potentially better than Invoked in Eldritch. Don't quote me on that. I'm just throwing it out there. It could be potentially as good, if not better, especially if anything in the Invoked engine gets hit on the ban list, because it's just like been splashed in so many things over the last couple of years. But yeah, I'm going to put them in tier 3. I do think they have upside for tier 2 and even tier 1 potential in a control deck like Eldritch Evil Twins type situation. Obviously, we'll have to see how that goes, but I think for now I'm going to keep them in tier 3, but leaning more towards like tier 2.5. In where they could end up. Which then takes us to Drytron. This is a really cool archetype. It's a ritual-based archetype, and because it's a ritual-based archetype, I think I have to put them in tier 3 as well. Here's the thing. This archetype does generically support like all ritual archetypes, which is very good. The downside, it's still a ritual archetype. It has one boss monster, and yes, if you get to that boss monster, he's pretty damn good, but like, if you don't get to him, like what does your archetype do? You really don't do much with the deck if you don't get to him. You just throw a bunch of bodies on the board. You weren't able to ritual summon into the big boy. You just didn't get any payoff for all the shenanigans you went through that turn. So I think I'm going to put them in tier 3 because I do think they have the potential of supplementing with something like Megaliths, something like Nekroz, right? Like decks like those, this could be a nice engine in and really propel them and combine with them to make some kind of, amalgamation of ritual strategies and end up somewhere in tier 3, maybe even tier 2 if something crazy happened. Like, I don't know. I'm not the biggest ritual guy, but I think I'm leaning more towards tier 3 for them, and so that's where I'm going to put them. Taking us to Magistus. This is another cool archetype. This one is, again, another one that's like really like you want to kind of splash it. That's what you want to do. Don't get crazy with it. Just splash it into stuff. Don't really get crazy. I don't think it's good enough for tier 2 yet, but I do think it is one of those archetypes that's like, it really strikes me as one of those archetypes that like looks too good and has potential that like it'll take one card. Kind of makes one really good card for this archetype, and this archetype is like immediately meta contender. So we'll see if we can get that, but at least for the time being, based off of the knowledge we have at this moment in time, Magistus is going to go in tier 3 for me. It has like interesting splashability with like Invoked, Dogmatica, Shaddolls. It really does have multiple things it can interestingly splash it with, but I just don't think it really is going to be there just yet. It's more like all of those archetypes it'd be combining with would be kind of like pulling the weight of this card and making this archetype look better than it is until it gets a legit like good card to really like round out the archetype. So tier 3 again for Magistus, which takes us to Spriggans. I love the artwork for this archetype. It's very, very cool. It just came out. It's coming in Blazing Vortex. It's the next lore with Tri-Brigade and Dogmatica, the next like archetype to go in there. Here's the thing though. This archetype is absolutely missing pieces. I believe we're going to get like 3 more cards in the set after Blazing Vortex, and it will make this deck a legitimate cool deck and potentially jump it up into competitive relevancy. But I think for right now, it's going to also fall into tier 3. I hate that I have to put so much stuff in tier 3, but I think this is where most decks follow as far as like new deck reveals and stuff and where they end up. It has a really cool boss monster, but it doesn't set up a ton of disruption, at least not consistently, and maybe that's just a thing for right now, and once we get 2-3 more cards in the following set after Blazing Vortex, maybe we'll be like, whoa, this really like put it all together for us. Right now it just doesn't feel like it works all together. It also can combine with Dogmatica. It seems like it kind of wants to do that, but obviously we're gonna have to wait and see if it really can efficiently combine with them, and I think it'll still probably just take more cards to get to that point. But I still think they look really good. They have some very promising abilities, all their main deck monsters just being able to like attach as material from grave even after you've used them to any Spriggan's Exceed is really nice. They just only have one Spriggan's Exceed. I'd like to see another one that's like actual disruption, and then maybe we could be going places. But until then, I'm going to keep them in tier 3 and not move them any higher, which takes us to our last archetype of this video. We have Security Force. This is like the second coming of Mech Knights, but not as good, I would say. They do, again, have some interesting cards. This girl right here, right on the top, she has the ability to just like summon any Security Force monster straight out of the deck on either player's turn as a quick effect, and that's pretty strong. They have some interesting cards. They have a pretty good boss monster. When I read the boss monster, I was like, this looks like the kind of boss monster that's going to be really bad. It was actually very surprisingly good. It's a disruption. It can just like banish everything it points to, and it has 3 up arrows, so just summon it pointing at like 2 or 3 monsters your opponent controls and just whoop, non-targeting, non-destruction, banish them. They do have some cool things going for them. I still think they're missing some cards. They have the ability to take advantage of stuff like Rhoda, E-Telly, and Signet Mining, because they actually have monsters of all 3 types that fit the requirements for those cards, which is pretty interesting. But we're definitely going to need to see a little bit more support from that. With these column-based strategies, stuff that like these strategies that have like extra requirements to work, you do need to have some pretty powerful payoff to really make them worth playing in a metagame. Unfortunately, they don't have that yet, so I'm going to put them in tier 3. I still would rank them higher than both of these guys so far, but we'll see. I still think it has potential, and we're going to have to see where these archetypes go. I think we're going to see new support for all these. We just got the new fusion for this. We got the new card for them revealed. I don't think we have a Drytron card revealed for the next set. No, I don't think we do. And we'll probably get Magista stuff, Spriggan stuff down the line. We're going to get the other cards imported for Virtual World and maybe more cards after that. We're going to get more Tri-Brigade cards. We just got those revealed for Blazing Vortex and so on and so forth. But I think right now with the initial reveals that we have for all of these decks, this is how I'm going to rank them in terms of how I'm expecting them to really show out in the competitive scene. But like I said, I think literally all 6 of these with like 1 or 2 cards could easily be like catapulted up into like tier 2 relevancy, at least as good as something like Salamangreat in the metagame. But of course, we're going to have to wait and see on that. But that's going to do it. Thank you so much for watching, guys. As always, you know the drill. Leave in the comment section down below, where do you think these should go? If you think I should move anything up or down in terms of where they could be competitively. I wish something seemed tier 1 potential, but unfortunately I just can't throw anything there yet. I don't see it just yet, and maybe that's just our current metagame. Maybe after a ban list in December, you know, everything could move up 1 tier. I don't know, but of course we're gonna have to wait and see as always. So thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't down below. Leave your comments on this tier list as well. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.